commencer. Comme vous vous en rendez compte, nous allons enregistrer ce webinaire. Donc, il sera ensuite disponible sur la chaîne YouTube de ICOMOS Canada. We will record this webinar, so it will be available online on the YouTube channel of ICOMOS Canada. Before turning to Fergus, I'd like to say a few words about our organization, if you allow me. Just to be clear, I think Fergus, you will present in English today, but Fergus is able to take a question in both languages. So if you want to make him questions, I know he's always happy to practice the French, so no problem on that. Pour les personnes francophones, donc Fergus va présenter en anglais, mais il peut répondre aux questions dans les deux langues, il n'y a aucun problème. Si vous le souhaitez, vous pouvez utiliser la fonction de Zoom qui permet d'avoir le sous-titrage automatique, donc à travers les trois petits points et ensuite le menu Captions. Donc, de bien sélectionner la langue d'origine en anglais et la langue de traduction en français. Alors, si vous me permettez, avant de commencer, quelques mots sur notre organisation. ICOMOS Canada, nous sommes le comité national de ICOMOS, le Conseil international des monuments et des sites. Donc, j'imagine que la plupart d'entre vous nous connaissez. Il y a beaucoup de membres dans la liste des gens qui sont là aujourd'hui. Je suis très heureux de vous y retrouver aujourd'hui. Notre organisation qui a été fondée donc, au niveau international suite à l'adoption de la Charte de Venise, dont nous fêtons les 60 ans cette année. Donc, c'est une année importante pour notre organisation et pour le patrimoine en général. Nous avons aussi, au sein de l'organisation, connu des changements dans les dernières années et nous souhaitions revenir à des activités qui nous avaient manqué un peu depuis la pandémie. Donc, notamment ce type d'activité de webinaire. Et puis, on a eu aussi l'occasion, par exemple, de faire un petit événement social à Montréal la semaine dernière ou il y a 2 semaines, et de reprendre un peu plus contact avec nos membres ici au Canada. Donc, si vous avez des idées ou des suggestions pour des activités ou pour des services ou des choses que vous pensez qui pourraient être utiles pour nos membres, n'hésitez pas, nous sommes toujours à l'écoute de vos idées et de vos suggestions. Donc, je voulais aussi vous signaler qu'il va y avoir d'autres conférences. We are beginning today with this lunch series, and I have to thanks for the organization of this series, Michael Maclaren and Catherine Riddle, who have been very essential to organizing this webinar. And the idea for us is to offer moments for encounters between our members and some of the ICOMOS Canadian members involved in the ISC, the International Scientific Committees, or involved in our board, for example, and to offer those moments of exchange to make clearer what is ICOMOS Canada inside ICOMOS International and what are the roles and the work that our international scientific committees are doing. So as professional members of ICOMOS Canada, you can be members of those international scientific committees, and there's a variety of them on very diverse topics: the conservation of woods, underwater heritage, urban heritage, and the one that will be interesting all of us today, which is cultural tourism. So we have the pleasure to begin this series of meeting ICOMOS Canada members in working in those international scientific committee today with Fergus Maclaren. Fergus is a Canadian sustainable tourism and cultural heritage management professional with more than 25 years of experience in too many countries to count. But let's say in North America, in Africa a lot, Europe, Asia also. You worked a lot in Asia. And much of these current professional focus involve tourism to World Heritage sites and the implementation of the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals. His background include a broad range of tourism planning, destination management, and development expertise. His professional experience includes coordinating international stakeholder meetings and input as the director of the UN-funded International Year of Ecotourism. He has been teaching sustainable tourism at Canada's McGill University, lecturing on the subject on post-secondary institutions internationally, and acting as a co-lead for the development and implementation of the ICOMOS International Cultural Heritage Tourism Charter, a very important document for those of us working with cultural tourism in World Heritage. He currently works in expert and professional capacities for UNESCO, UN Tourism, the ICOMOS, of course, the Organization of World Heritage City, the World Monument Funds, the Economic Innovation Institute for Africa, and the Heritage and Cultural Society for Africa. So he's also a private consultant with his own firm, MacDuff Tourism, Heritage and Planning. So it's really an honor and a pleasure to have Fergus today, which is really one of the best people to talk to us about cultural tourism, and especially about what the International Committee on Cultural Tourism is working on and the contribution he made to the challenges we are seeing in tourism management in heritage sites all over the world. So thank you very much, Fergus, again, and to you now. You're muted. You're muted.
Oui, c'est
Yeah.
ça. Merci beaucoup, Mathieu, pour tes bons mots. C'est un privilège pour venir ici pour la présentation. Thank you for having me, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. So I will start my presentation. And there you go. So I said so looking at with the thought of the invitation to present here to talk about ISCs, I thought I'd just give you a good sense in terms of the background of the International Cultural Tourism Committee, the charter, which is our main principal document that we work with, and our work, because our work right now is primarily driven by the charter and some of the applications that we have been using around the world over the past 2 years. Much for our sites, as I mentioned, we talk about World Heritage Sites. This, of course, is one of the locks on the Rideau Canal, which is the World Heritage Site near where I live, which is just on the other side of the border in Quebec, where I live in the country. So to give you a bit of a background about myself, I did my master's thesis research in Hanoi. This was basically looking at the preservation plan for the French colonial quarter in the central city of Hanoi, where you have places like this wonderful locale, which is a recreation of Garnier's Opera House in Paris. And then I completed my work in 1994. And since that time, Hanoi got its first World Heritage Site in 2010, which was its celebration of its millennium. And it was for the Imperial Citadel of Thang Long, which is a building that's still existent within the communities, despite the conflicts during the Vietnam War, the impacts during the Vietnam War. I was introduced to ICOMOS through my thesis advisor at the time and a friend now, Dr. Walter Jameson, and he opened up the world of cultural heritage, not only in Canada, but internationally. My further sort of awareness of cultural heritage and World Heritage Sites was enhanced when I became director of the International Year of Ecotourism between 2001 and 2003, where I was based in Burlington, Vermont. I then ended up joining ICOMOS Canada in 2003 when I returned from Vermont to begin my life back here in the Ottawa area. Joined the ICTC in 2008 at the ICOMOS General Assembly in Quebec. And I've been president of the ICOMOS ICTC since 2017. So for about 7 years. So essentially that's sort of my ICOMOS journey, where I started from. Now, in terms of the organization, we had around 200 plus members. We're just a little bit below that, ranging from planning, landscape architecture, archaeology, and other sort of professional backgrounds that somehow tap into either cultural heritage or the visitor economy. And so really, we have a broad range of professionals from around the world. We provide study tours. So these are study tours for our individual members that are dedicated towards trying to do sort of a quick sort of 3 to 7 day presentation and participation at a local site, where we do in a sort of intense behind the scenes observation of what's going on with the local cultural tourism there, and then present a report to the cultural tourism authorities to give them a quick sense of what we understand and observe in their presentation of those cultural tourism resources. We also do World Heritage Tourism assessments prior to the World Heritage Committee meetings, like the one that's going on in Delhi right now. We do professional research services and also policy development support for organizations and destinations that are trying to improve the management of their sites. We work with national and international agencies and organizations that can include UNESCO's World Heritage Center, UN Tourism, which used to be the UN World Tourism Organization, other authorities, and also partners of ICOMOS, like the Organization World Heritage Cities, World Monuments Fund, and our advisory body partners like ICROM and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN. So there's a broad range of cooperation that goes on through various levels of destination management and different levels of visitor economy. The basis of our work now is the International Cultural Heritage Tourism Charter, which serves as our key doctrine and operational approach that I'll be discussing later. In terms of current membership numbers, as I said, we're around 200. It's shrunk a little bit over time as people sort of interest change, or as things sort of evolve with our organization, but we're represented within almost 40 countries, many of them in the geographical north. And we have 4 ICOMOS Canada members, myself, Marie-Christine Blais, Walter Jameson, and our newest member, Carlos Montoya Guevara, who's based in Vancouver. We haven't had a chance to tell him that yet, but he is our newest member of our ISC. So again, I always like to grow domestic numbers within Canada in terms of professional colleagues working in the field. So this is part of the sort of intent of having this presentation. Our membership categories are divided into expert, associate, institutional, and honorary categories. Experts can nominate themselves to join the organization. You don't have to have your national committee, like ICOMOS Canada, promote you as a potential member. But if you are certified and supported by your national committee, whether it's ICOMOS Canada or some other national committee around the globe, you can serve as a voting member. And voting members allow you to vote at ICOMOS General Assemblies and Annual General Assemblies, and also enable you to vote on different sort of statutes and matters pertaining to cultural tourism. At this point in time, I am Canada's voting member, being the president amongst our 24 voting members that we have right now from around the globe. Our current key intentions as an organization are to promote the charter use. Again, I'll be discussing that shortly. In the wake of things like over-tourism that we've seen since around 2015, 2014 at different destinations, different sorts of environmental challenges like climate change, and also the impacts of COVID. We're trying to work more with destinations with regard to their own sustainability and resiliency. The other element that we're trying to focus on right now is to expand our emerging professional numbers. we're also trying to ensure that we are moving into less represented regions. The intention with that is that too often, particularly across ICOMOS, the focus is more on Europe, North America, certain parts of Asia, Australia, and we want to ensure that less represented regions like Africa, Latin America, again, other parts of Asia, have better representation in the organization and in our ISC, because certainly they experience and have to deal with destination management issues in their own countries, and would benefit from the opportunity of networking and support that can be provided through colleagues in our ISC. And so if you want to find out more about the organization and our membership, just go to www.icomositc.org, and you'll have the full background, and also it gives an explanation of what the membership is like in order to participate in our ISC. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and just to give a broader sense of the work that we do and the direction that we're taking as an ISC, because I think this is really important to get an understanding in terms of how ISCs work and what we're trying to achieve in their individual sectors, and more importantly, trying to work within ICOMOS and our broader partnership, is the development of our charter, which was ratified at the ICOMOS Annual General Assembly in Bangkok in 2022. And the intention here was to update the document in a way that is both reflective of the changes that are occurring in the field, but also to ensure its relevancy, which I'll show as in part as an application to one of the World Heritage Sites where I live near, which is of course Rideau Canal.
Fergus, I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't see your presentation anymore, and I don't know if I'm the only one, but just to be sure and check.
Okay.
It may be le partage a dû s'arrêter.
Okay. Let me just see here. Thanks for letting me know. Let me just
No
see.
problem.
Okay. So how's that?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know what happened, but yeah, we'll keep at it. Okay, still
Thank
there?
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it is. Thanks.
Okay. So, in talking about the first charter, which was in 1976, we were actually also one of the first committees developed for ICOMOS in the mid 1970s, and the actual sort of this discussion and charter that was created was the first charter that was ever ratified and supported by ICOMOS. So we have that sort of basis for our work. The main focus of the charter at that time was tourism, which focused on sites and monuments like World Heritage Sites or other cultural heritage sites, sorry, as a source of economic benefit and cultural education. We wanted to really see tourism as a way to focus on education, and also trying to provide that sort of cluster of support and grassroots support for the monuments where they lived or where they visited. And at the same time, to try and ensure that there was adequate and appropriate training for stakeholders on how to visit and manage destinations that had sensitive cultural heritage resources and intangible cultural heritage as well. The next charter iteration was in 1999, which was in Mexico City, where it was ratified. And the intent was, in the wake of the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, the intention was now to start looking more towards elements of sustainability, the economic, environmental, social, and cultural aspects of sustainability, and how that could be reinforced through documents like the International Cultural Tourism Charter. And part of this was to look at respecting and enhancing the heritage and living cultures where people are visiting. Again, as I mentioned before, focusing on sustainability. And again, there is a greater dimension on those communities that were being impacted by tourism. And so this was sort of the lens that, the background that served as a foundation for our work. And so looking forward, with the redevelopment of the charter in 2017, we started looking at aspects where we needed to address the impacts of tourism on local communities. This had been, of course, wrapped into the previous charter iteration, but more importantly, we wanted to say, how are communities being impacted? How are they actually benefiting? And what are sort of the long-term impacts of doing so? We recognize that cultural heritage districts and site management authorities, there's always continuing pressures. I mean, look at places like Venice, Barcelona, Dubrovnik, Amsterdam, sites, and even here in Canada with Lake Louise and Banff, and other destinations that are really being impacted by huge numbers of visitors during certain times of the year. So again, that was part of the way that, some of the things we have to discuss. We recognize that there's also varying levels of accountability among site management authorities, and this becomes problematic because at the end of the day, who's making the decisions and what are those decisions driven by, besides economic growth and jobs, particularly when it comes to sensitive cultural resources, tangible and intangible, that need to be preserved and maintained. We realize that adaptive and proactive management can be costly and time-consuming. Consultation is really important, and you're really trying to address challenges as they come along. Think about COVID, think about natural disasters, think about conflict like in Ukraine right now. There's all kinds of circumstances and issues that are going on that constantly have to be addressed and, trying to resolve in a timely and effective manner. And finally, facilitating inclusive and participatory governance, it can be challenging. Different stakeholders have different perspectives, different interests, and different intentions when it comes to managing a resource or a destination. And again, it's how do you get everyone on the same page, understanding the reasons and the necessary balance that is required. So in terms of the work that we did to assess how we could update the charter, we started looking at backwards and reflecting on the different elements that have occurred over that time. One was the International Year of Ecotourism that I mentioned I was involved with. This is Vanuatu, an island in the South Pacific. And basically to look at things like sustainable tourism, different stakeholders, and how you start looking at World Heritage Sites as well. And this sort of was one of the sort of initial points. Then in 2003, you had the Intangible Cultural Heritage. It's a convention that was introduced. Canada is not yet a signatory, by the way, along with Australia, the United States, and New Zealand. We're moving towards hopefully trying to get Canada to eventually sign on. There are a number of reasons, but I won't get into them here. But for a number of sites in terms of attraction, that intangible cultural heritage, whether it's music, dance, art, food, other forms of cultural expression, that's what will often draw people to individual sites around the world. There's also the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2008. Again, trying to look at ways where Indigenous peoples actually have a say through free, prior, and informed consent to ensure that there's an actual permission and ability to undertake touristic activities in a place that is both respectful and involving of the local communities who are there with their traditions. They're people who can actually benefit from the employment and economic development, and the communities themselves. In 2015, we started to see things related to over-tourism. Again, this had been a growing problem since the adaptation of different sorts of inexpensive flights within Europe, city breaks, other sort of aspects. And while much of the focus was on European cities like Venice here, there are also other places, of course, that are trying to find ways to not only deal with the increasing number of visitors, which many people appreciate the economic aspect of, but you still have to deal with infrastructure, you still have to deal with waste, you still have to deal with water, you still have to deal with a number of facets, overcrowding, housing, of course, being an issue with short-term rentals. So again, there became a range of different challenges. Many of these were outlined in 2015 with the introduction of these United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. This is a graphic from the UN Tourism, who at that time posited that all 17 goals are attributed to tourism. There's some connection one way or another, whether it's health or education, sustainable cities and communities. There is a connection to the Sustainable Development Goals, which 3 of them are related to tourism, 8.9, 12B, and 14.7. that talk about sustainable tourism and the benefits to local communities. In 2017, we had the International Year of Sustainable Tourism for Destinations. This was a key issue in terms of trying to see where communities were in terms of 2 years after the introduction of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also how communities were actually benefiting and supporting different aspects of their local environments, cultural heritage, and also, interestingly, one of the 5 themes was to use tourism as an instrument of peace. So again, how you support that cultural interaction between people for greater global understanding. So when we developed our charter, the key thing was that, we wanted to ensure its relevance. You've seen a number of the elements that help sort of shape its eventual sort of packaging and structure, but also the challenges that are being faced in terms of trying to ensure that that document, whatever you create now, actually serves a purpose. And you'll see where it's actually being used and not just some document that sits on a shelf or is being consulted by academics and others who use it on a sound basis, but we wanted to ensure greater applicability. So in the development of the new charter, we focused on a number of areas, more equitable gender participation. Again, we talked about the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So again, how we support that through working more with Indigenous groups and their equitable participation. Looking at site carrying capacity limits. How many people can a place actually take? How many people can actually work within that given destination? Professionalizing heritage dissemination interpretation. It's a big problem in many destinations in terms of the quality and accuracy of that information that's being presented. How we have different stakeholders within the tourism sector understand the importance of maintaining the values and the quality and the maintenance of different aspects of cultural heritage. How we deal with natural disaster, conflict, and pandemic impacts. That certainly came into greater relevance in 2020, but it has been an ongoing issue, of course, on other cultural heritage sites. And how to deal with things like climate change. Again, I believe that's one of our biggest issues, particularly as you're seeing cities now being flooded, being damaged by higher seas at different sites, more turbulent sort of weather conditions as we've been experiencing. So how do we deal with one of those sort of key current issues that's coming up? And most importantly, from all of those sort of 7 characteristics, how do we increase destination sustainability and resiliency? So I wanted to give a quick sort of case study just to show how I could see where the 7 principles that I just mentioned could be applied, just using the Rideau Canal because it's where I live and it's what I know well. And many of you, of course, are familiar with, those of you who have either visited it or live in the Ottawa area. The Rideau Canal was construction started in 1832, completed in 1836. It was intended as a strategic waterway after the War of 1812 to ensure that trade, commerce, and human movement could be secure against the traditional waterways that had been closer to the U.S. border. It stretches 202 kilometers in the west from Kingston up to the entry here in Ottawa on the left, right by near the confluence of the Gatineau, Rideau, and Ottawa rivers. And on the right, you can see what the Rideau Canal entry looked like, just with Parliament Hill, the entry point, Charles, and of course, we used to have trains there as well. So here's an actual map. You have Ottawa up here on the right, on the northeast, and to the southwest, you have Kingston, and you have the 39 different communities that stretch from east to west and that benefit somehow from the visitor economy. This is what the canal, for those of you who haven't visited, but can look like during the summer. Very attractive and, of course, very prominent sort of visual landscape with Parliament Hill and the Chateau Laurier. And then here you have, of course, when it turns into a platform to sell beaver tails, or as we like to know, the world's longest skating rink. So So our formal sort of 7, to go through this quickly so I can get to the other part of how the charter is applied. Principle 1 is to place cultural heritage protection and conservation at the center of responsible cultural tourism planning and management. Here we have the Punamali locks being preserved here in it's just to the southwest of Smiths Falls. And again, this is in 2018. And of course, you have to maintain and support the conservation and management of the different facets of your World Heritage Site. And of course, being 202 kilometers along, an older structure with specific masonry techniques is not cheap and it takes time, but it's a necessary part of destination management. 2, manage tourism at cultural heritage places through planning instruments and management plans informed by monitoring and carrying capacity and other planning instruments. This is the Rideau Canal World Heritage Site Management Plan from 2020. Again, Parks Canada is the authority, but there are different communities that are involved and different stakeholders. And of course, it's necessary to ensure that those plans and policies are outlined formally. 3, enhance public awareness and visitor experience through education, sensitive interpretation, and presentation of cultural heritage. Again, trying to update and ensure that you have high quality, but really usable, legible forms of interpretation along the different aspects of a 202-kilometer long property, which is not always easy, as you know, in terms of trying to maintain that consistency and maintenance of those different interpretive elements, particularly during Canadian weather in the winter. 4, recognize and reinforce the rights of communities, Indigenous peoples, and traditional owners by including access and engagement in participatory governance of the cultural and natural heritage commons used in tourism. This is a great hall in the Canadian Museum of History, and this land, as with much of the canal, is based on Anishinaabe land. And again, there's always an intention to try and ensure there's participation from the local Anishinaabe and also Algonquin bands in the management, interpretation, and benefits from the canal. 5, raise awareness of cultural heritage and reinforce cooperation for heritage conservation among all tourism stakeholders involved in tourism. The 204 kilometers long, you've got a lot of different municipal, federal, and pseudo-federal government bodies that have a hand or stake in how the canal is run and its maintenance and operation. So again, just wanting to show a few of these here. And it's really important to recognize that many sites have those challenges and needs to ensure better coordination and understanding of what's involved and why you're maintaining these kinds of resources. Principle 6, increase the resilience of communities and cultural heritage sites and destinations, and host communities through capacity development, risk assessment, strategic planning, and adaptive management. Again, there are different ways that communities need to see themselves involved within a site. That does not always occur, and that becomes a challenge because that express benefit and intention of giving a specific designation, whether it's a National Historic Site or World Heritage Site, becomes challenging, and sometimes there's friction and frustration, particularly when communities don't see an actual benefit being derived from a tangible or intangible cultural heritage resource that they use and that is part of their community, but that they don't really see themselves as being a part of it as much as they could be. Finally, integrate climate action and sustainability measures in the management of cultural tourism and local cultural heritage. Many of you who live here in Ottawa know that for the past 2-3 years, it's been a real challenge to open up the Rideau Canal. It's supposed to a skating rink area. It's supposed to generate up to almost $100 million for the local visitor economy. With the challenges posed by climate change, you can imagine how much of an issue that is in terms of the economic fallout from that, but also the recreation and how Ottawans and people who visit the capital enjoy the city and how it has become a big part of the social, cultural, and recreational fabric of this place. And it's moving forward, who knows on the longevity of the consistent ice that's needed to maintain this over time. That's one of the big questions that are being posed right now with the impacts of climate change on the canal. So in terms of the implementation of the charter, this is again to discuss sort of the work that we're doing. One of our key intentions is to translate the charter into as many languages as possible to encourage accessibility. We currently have the charters translated into 8 languages. We are looking at Hindi, Greek, and German right now as the next 3 languages, but we will probably be the most widely translated doctrinal document in ICOMOS with the intention of ensuring that there's a broad-based use as possible. And this means presenting to diverse groups to show how different facets can be applied, the 7 principles that I mentioned, particularly those pertaining to sustainability and climate change, and how we've tried to integrate charter principles and intentions into projects, as you'll see here moving forward. One of the projects that we've been involved with was the Buzluja Monument that's located between Sofia, Bulgaria, the capital, and the Black Sea. It looks like something out of Starship Enterprise, and it's quite an intriguing site. And we use the charter principles to develop a sustainable cultural tourism plan for a structure that's being revitalized and had been abandoned since 1989. The charter principles were used in the development of a virtual reality, augmented reality software platform developed by our colleague Pankaj Manchanda, based in Delhi in India. And the intention is to use this to be able to explore, understand, and even gamify World Heritage Sites in India. And it's starting to be applied and used elsewhere as well. So again, the charter principles served as the basis for that. We also worked with the Organization of World Heritage Cities, an ICOMOS partner, on the development of a cultural tourism and visitor management framework with the intention that it could serve as a basis for development, combining the Sustainable Development Goals, visitor management assessment and strategy tool developed by UNESCO, and also the charter to have an approach and monitoring capability to look at how sites could become more resilient and be able to address some of the challenges moving forward post-COVID, and how they could redevelop their cultural tourism in a more resilient and sustainable manner. We also worked with UN Tourism in the development of more accessible forms of tourism, particularly to cultural heritage sites. This was introduced last year, ISO standard 21902, and the charter principles served as the basis for how we would help and support the development of more accessible forms of tourism, both physical and neurodiverse, to different types of cultural heritage sites around the world. And finally, last December, thanks to our colleague, Dr. Ivan Henares, who is now the Secretary General for the Philippines National Commission for UNESCO, the charter is now integrated as part of the National Heritage and Culture Act. We serve as one of the key reference documents. And so apart from just being a ICOMOS doctrine, it is now actually something that serves as a functioning part of a national law and regulation. So to conclude, we recognize that cultural tourism authorities are facing a number of unforeseen challenges. It's ongoing, how you manage a destination and the expectations that you have from the different stakeholders who are involved, and how you always, we work towards maintaining its sustainability, resiliency, and viability. We see the charter as a big driver of change in thinking and approach, in terms of many destinations or venues have come to us to say, how can we help sort of improve our cultural tourism offering and presentation? And sort of, the charter really helps to provide those different basis points which you can use to help drive your official documentation. We do find, however, that it's important for tourism and cultural heritage professionals to continue to find ways to work together. There are 31 scientific committees in ICOMOS, and though many don't realize it, tourism is a necessary and important part of how they manage their sites. And this is something that we have are working on an ongoing basis. We also recognize that, the big future issue is climate change. We're seeing it at many of our destinations, not just rising seas, rising waters, but again, from the example with the Rideau Canal, it's, has a significant impact on the quality of life, recreation, economic benefits and other factors that can be attributed to one of the key sites within the city. So again, this is an issue that we're trying to find better ways to address. And finally, for those who are here, thank you for joining us and thank you for participating. We welcome all qualified interested candidates to the ICOMOS ICTC. We're a growing organization. We have a really good core and cadre of membership, and we will do really interesting work, as you've just seen. And so, we would welcome your interest. And as I mentioned before, you're welcome to visit www.icomosictc.org, and we look forward to hearing from you. Merci beaucoup, and thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Fergus. Merci infiniment pour cette présentation. Thank you very much. I must say it's always an ongoing question we have at ICOMOS. That is, what are you doing? What is doing ICOMOS? And I think it's important, and that's the idea of this series, lunchtime series, is to make clear that there's a lot of work done, maybe on different aspects, but the ISCs and the possibility to work with international colleagues, experts, and that network of more than 11,000 people in the world, members of ICOMOS, is something that we can see for concrete in those kinds of actions, and very important actions you've been presenting and mentioning. So thank you very much for that. I think it's making things more real of what ICOMOS International and what the international scientific committees are doing. So and you were the first, but definitely not the least of our Canadian members of ISCs who are going to present in the next weeks and months a little pieces of the work they are doing internationally. So if it's already 1 o'clock, and I know a lot of you have probably other engagements and work to do. But if you have any question for Fergus, whether it's for the question and answer window that you have on the bottom of your screen, the Q&A, you can answer a question writing, or just requesting raising your hand and requesting to speak directly. Just to break ice, I have an ongoing question, and I know we already discussed that at some point, but what strikes me in the situation today is that regarding the charter and the new ISO 21902 norms and that kind of, and saying, acknowledging that climate change is really the big issue for the future of humanity, not only heritage. But on the other side, we never seen so much tourism as today, even with the pandemic. And I think it was last week that I was reading a memo of UN Tourism about the fact that we'll probably go over the top we already touched in 2019, and 2024 will be the year with most tourism ever on the planet. So it seems that we back where we were, and further in 2024. So how do we manage to reconciliate that unstoppable march of growing tourism internationally and those principles you were mentioning in the charter?
First off, thank you for your question, Mathieu, and I agree. It's you had that brief window where people were starting to rediscover their own cities again, whether you were Venice, whether you're Dubrovnik or Amsterdam. You also had less sort of crowded venues and destinations. But there are a couple of things that are going on right now where one of the big intentions for a lot of destination management organizations, the national, regional, local tourism bodies, is to find ways to divert away from these sort of honeypots, as they call them, big time destinations that draw people, whether it's a city or a site like a Machu Picchu or an Angkor Wat, and how do you sort of, distribute those visitor numbers of people who are already in that country and are attracted by this key site, but can we spread them to other communities, experiences, benefits, etc. That part is often challenging because of the fact that many people see these high profile destinations, whether World Heritage Sites or interesting locations or, um, different sorts of cultural or natural experiences, they see that as part of a bucket list. And so as a result, if you haven't been to Paris or if you haven't been to Fiji or if you haven't seen the Great Wall of China or um, Mount Kilimanjaro, I mean, there are all these sort of aspects where people are trying to, get that sort of tourism in now, particularly as we age, where at some point you can't go to these great destinations. But what I would argue that is that in the case of principles, as these destinations are evolving, and particularly for those that are opening up, I'm thinking of nascent areas like in Africa, particularly West Africa, Central Africa, certain parts of Asia that are opening up. There are still challenges in terms of how can we open up in our tourism in a way that makes sense from a community standpoint, a destination standpoint. One things that we should consider that we hadn't thought of before when it comes to environmental management or interpretation. And most importantly, how do we ensure that local communities benefit? Because at the end of the day, it's their cultural heritage, whether tangible or intangible. And so too often it either gets swept up or, their role or participation is not always as great or viable as it should be.
Yeah, big challenge. We had a question in the Q&A. Do you consider hosting a tourism conference in the long run? And maybe I would broaden the question to how members of ICOMOS Canada members or anyone can maybe access that kind of information of exchange debates, like in conferences, or other events.
So it depends what kind of tourism conference you'd be referencing. I'm not sure under the guise of ICOMOS Canada or whether in the broader sense for the work of the ICTC. Often during the year, I have different conferences that I'm involved with that focus either on a thematic issue or a geographic issue. I'll be presenting in Bangkok at the beginning of August and then traveling to Borneo to take part in a rural and ecotourism event that talks about different facets of culture, heritage, and natural heritage. And so again, it's not always easy to say when you talk about tourism, there's just so many different kinds and so many different facets. But certainly if there's one that would be of interest to ICOMOS Canada members, and how we deal with tourism to cultural heritage sites or in partnership with our natural heritage site partners, sure, we'd be happy to do so.
And if there's any meetings, for example, meetings of the ICTC that is accessible, who has a symposium part, maybe accessible to other people.
There will be the ICOMOS Annual General Assembly will be taking place in Ouro Preto, Brazil, at the beginning of November. We will be hosting an event that discusses the charter and the work of the ICTC. That will be in the first week of November. So certainly, we'll try to ensure that I send a link through ICOMOS Canada so that interested people are able to join if they're available and would like to. And then at the end of November, we've been working on the past year and a half on something that we call Africa 24. And that is going to be the first ICOMOS conference in sub-Saharan Africa that talks about different aspects of cultural heritage, architectural conservation, young professionals, and of course, tourism and climate change will be part of that discussion. And I'll be talking about the charter and its implications for African cultural heritage sites and World Heritage sites as part of the discussion for that event, which will be available online. And so that's, again, that's something that I can share through ICOMOS Canada's communications channels.
Yeah, of course, we will share that through ICOMOS Canada's newsletter. And I don't know, maybe you have yourself at the ICTC newsletters. Maybe people can sign in, but either way, would be sharing that with ICOMOS Canada's newsletter.
That would be great. We have social media. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and certainly you're welcome to. We welcome, as we do with members, we welcome all, because we want to try and ensure that we have a good, strong core and base of people who we work with who are knowledgeable and want to share their knowledge and experience at the same time.
Okay, excellent. Maybe one last regarding the you were saying that anybody you invited people to be member of the ICTC, so I guess they have to contact the ICTC first, and or eventually ICOMOS Canada afterwards, or just to be clear that if people reach to you directly or have to go through ICOMOS Canada first,
Right.
what's the best way?
So for self-nominated experts, for persons who are just interested in doing so, we request that they be part of a national committee. And so one of the things is that if you would like to join the ICTC, please be a sort of card-carrying member of ICOMOS Canada or whatever national committee you would like to be joining that's relevant to where you live. And for those who are, there are different reasons why they may not have a national committee. Sorry, they can also be national members. Sorry, international members. So as a result, you can still be a member of ICOMOS, but recognizing that you don't have a national committee in your country, you can still join ICOMOS and then join the ICTC after that. And then when you go to the membership subpage of our ICOMOS ICTC webpage, you will see that there are different categories. There are the voting members, but there are already many of those who are in place. But as a self-nominated expert, you are still able to participate in discussions, webinars, events, our listserv, and also projects, because we sometimes have calls for interest or participation in different projects. And those persons who have relevant experience and understanding of these sites are certainly welcome to apply to participate and be a part of what the interesting work that we're doing.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. There was a comment from Doug, even saying the concerns about over-tourism are old. I remember in the late 70s and early 80s, the concern raised about tourism footfall destroying medieval tiles and pavement in cathedrals. Nowadays, many important sites are developing visitor centers and so-called experience attraction within and adjacent to the sites. All of this is impacting authenticity and integrity of site. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. Doug, nice to see you on this platform. We interact every so often, so thanks for your question. So two things. One is that I agree. There are sort of different aspects to be looking at in terms of how you manage the destination, but how you also manage flow to the destination, how you put people through the destination so that they feel like they're getting experience, it's meeting their expectations, and they're understanding the interpretation that goes on for that site. And I see one of those great examples of that is the rebuilding of Notre Dame. A good friend of mine, Chris Marion, who's head of the ICOR that deals with risk protection for different cultural heritage sites, has been involved with the conservation and renewal of Notre Dame. And one of the opportunities which I hope they will ensure has really focused on is how you flow people through that site, because it's a centuries old cathedral. And yes, it'll be hardened with the new construction and materials there, but you still need to operate it better for how you deal with all the huge numbers of people who go through there on a daily basis, whether it's a visitor center, whether it's different types of interpretation, whether it's virtual reality. That's one aspect. The other one, and this is just, it's a personal example for me, is that I worked at Lake Louise about 40 years ago. Yes, I'm that old. Yeah, you can't tell by looking at me, but I am that old. And when I was there, pretty easy access, pretty easy to get in there, parking, see the site, etc., around the chateau. Now, during the summer, if you want to visit or get a parking space, sorry, up at the chateau, you have to be there at 6 in the morning, and the parking lot fills up within half an hour. You also have shuttles that are required to be taken from the ski hill across the highway because of the fact that there's just so many people, there's so much demand. One of the main roads, Marine Lake, has been closed off because there's just too many visitors there. And in fact, in some instances, particularly with the upcoming long weekend for Canada Day, the road will be barred. It'll be shut down because there's just too many tourists to that place. So you can imagine, we hear about Barcelona, we hear about Venice, Dubrovnik, Beijing, other parts of the world, but it's happening here. And as Doug is saying, there are ways, strategies, approaches, technology, other elements that need to be introduced because, as Mitzi, as you said, those visitor numbers are increasing and the resources aren't expanding their footprints. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, it has been interesting to see a few intents of responses to that. Doug is adding another example is tonnage. How do you locate a visitor center without impacting authenticity and intuitivity? And how do you relocate a national highway, which is way more complicated than an depression center?
Yeah, no, and that's a big ongoing challenge, but it also speaks to the sensitivity of how the site might be affected by the construction, and as well the fact that more easily accessible. Like, for example, is going to see a huge increase in tourists because of the building of the new airport 15 kilometers away. So it's there's all kinds of things that, particularly when it comes to access, that really starts to place huge demands upon a site. And
Mm-hmm.
where you might have new highways, new rail routes, new airports opening up, great for the local economy, great for the visitor economy that it supports, but you really have to look and see how it's going to be affecting and impacting the site which it's feeding at the same time.
Yeah, and I was mentioning the reaction in some places, and especially we've seen that in Quebec, but also in Venice or places like that, which is on the other side, is not how you manage the flux, but how you reduce the flux, and the way some sites are trying to moderate the numbers by imposing fees, entry fees, and limits. And so we saw that in Venice, of course, where you have to pay now to visit Venice. And there were a few attempts in Quebec, especially in les îles de la Madeleine and Percé in Gaspésie, but where municipalities had to step back to ask for a voluntary contribution because actually the fiscality is very complex and it's complicated for them to do effectively that kind of measures. But do you think that's something that could be that's a tool that could be more developed, or is it a true good idea or a false good idea?
So it's so two things, and one of them I'll also bring up the short-term rental question because that's really significant. But in terms of tourism taxes, in principle, it's a user pays sort of approach, which you think would be viable for a destination because if you're coming here, you're using our water, you're using our streets, you're using our infrastructure. Therefore, we'd like you to contribute to the overall need to maintain all the various services and elements that are necessary to make sure that a place maintains itself as a viable destination, whether it's a big city or a small community. The challenge is like so many taxes, it doesn't always go to the area where it's supposed to be attributed toward. And even though
Mm-hmm.
you collect all this money, especially through tourism numbers, especially those that are increasing, it's all well and good to say, okay, now we know what it's supposed to go towards, but it's the allocation which makes the big difference. The other element that just to sort of put in there is short-term rentals, and this has come up recently with the recent law in Barcelona about banning short-term rentals, and certainly Montreal has issues with that as well. And other communities are trying to deal with the decrease in rental housing stock and availability and accessibility, and a number of communities have tried to put a clamp down on it. particularly in the case of Barcelona, which is saying, you need to go back to traditional inns, hotels, other forms of accommodation. That's fine. But at the same time, the reason why those short-term rentals developed in the first place was that people wanted another form or different type of accommodation. And there wasn't always that availability of hotels or other types of guest houses or other resources for people to stay. So in a way, they were meeting they were fulfilling a need or a demand that was there for people to stay somewhere. And especially in smaller communities, homestays, um, uh, guest houses, other venues are still popular because the hotel or accommodation infrastructure isn't there. But once it does transform, once it changes a place, that's where you really become into a delicate balance in terms of what people want and expect versus what is actually being built and available on the ground to accommodate all those people. And that itself might be a limiting factor for someone going to a larger city or well-known destination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, I agree. And Duke is mentioning Mexico that has been collecting tourist taxes at the airport for over 25 years, and there's many other places like that. I mean, Costa Rica has done that, and so on. But it's kind of different to me in the way that those taxes are not site related. So it's more of it's kind of it's another kind of taxes which is nationwide than and in that case, I think we go back to your first point, which is how that money really get to the community and the affected sites, because that's the problem. It's collected at the national level, but not always makes its way, sorry, to the local community. But yes, that's part of the measures that we have seen in many countries. In Latin America, there's a lot of countries doing that, actually.
And we actually have hotel taxes, and some communities have other sorts of sort of fees that they tack on, like service fees of some kind or another that they tack onto their bills. Next time you travel, look at your hotel bill and see what's being charged, and
Yeah,
you'll be quite interested to see like property fees or management fees and hotel taxes and service fees. It's becoming a bit of a racket that way as well. But again, like I said before, it comes down to allocation and how those monies are actually used because most importantly for me, even if they are, being charged to tourists, the resources that they're intended for are supposed to support the local community, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's services, improving healthcare, education, however those monies go towards supporting the local community.
yeah.
Um, Again, that's critical as opposed to, well, we need a new building for this, or salaries going up, which is always it's a huge issue to deal with as well. But again, I think there has to be some sort of framing around where possible those monies can be allocated towards.
Yeah, because those taxes, and we do have that in Quebec. In Quebec, if you stay in an hotel, you have like a $1 on your bill that is a tourism tax, but it actually is intended to finance the tourism ministry and ecosystem, so the Association Régionale de Tourisme, which are promoting tourism. So those taxes are not there to support the resource use in the sites, but are there to promote more tourism. So there's kind of a contradiction. We are, in fact, collecting those taxes at the national or provincial level to increase tourism and not compensate the communities, which is uh, actually it's kind of contradiction, but
Well, yeah, and that's how many destination management organizations work.
yeah,
They have those fees, like you said, or taxes, basically sustains their income and ability to employ staff to again further expand or enhance their offering, which is great. But the offering or the
yeah,
results can only bear so much. So.
yeah. We have all of a big paradigm change that needs to unfold in the next year, I think, and big challenges. But fortunately, there are many experts gathering and working on new tools and the charter and the ISO norm at the international level, like you and the committee, Fergus. So It's already 1:24:25, and so I'd like to thank you again very much, Fergus, for the very interesting presentation, the discussion. I know that you remain available to our members that need more information or want to join you in the ICTC. On my part and from ICOMOS Canada, I want to thank you, everybody, to attend this webinar, to be there with us, whether you're an ICOMOS Canada member or not. If you're not, consider being a member, and please feel free to contact me at the email address you're seeing in this Zoom presentation, president@canada.icomos.org. We hope that it's shed some light on what the ISCs are doing, and stay tuned with our next lunch time series with a new presentation soon. Again, thank you, Michael and Catherine, for the organization of this event, and everybody have a nice end of the day and a nice Canada Day. Thanks you very much.
Thank you for the kind invitation. And keep up the great work with you and your ICOMOS Canada colleagues. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Merci. Bonne fin de journée.
Yeah, well, see.